Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nick here with What Game Now, and we're going to have a bit of a more macro scale video today. In the past, on a lot of these Nick Knows War Wednesdays, we've been talking about factions and specific games, and today I've got something a little bit more generic that I wanted to address, and that is the topic of game mechanics, specifically with an eye towards what I consider to be bad mechanics. I see these in a lot of miniature games, and if you've watched some of our other videos, you'll notice I might have complained about a few of them. But we're going to talk about what, at least in my opinion, makes a good mechanic, what makes a bad mechanic, and go through some examples of some really bad mechanics that I think decrease the enjoyment of a game. And the reason I've thought of this topic, and it's been constantly something in my head for a good long while, is about 6 years ago when I was in grad school, I was watching a YouTube video as I was waiting for a class, and it was by a channel called Extra Credits. Now, they've gone on and they've done very different things since then, but at the time, they were solely focused on video game design discussions, and they had a video called Balancing for Multiplayer. And what it was a video where they talked about in game design how to design mechanics for video games. And the thesis of the video was that any mechanic must increase the number of available strategies available to both players. And that oftentimes this was forgotten or neglected in game design. The example they gave in the video, if I recall right, is imagine, say, a sniper in a multiplayer game kills you or kills somebody in the game, and you have no idea where it came from, and you're just getting blown apart by the sniper. Even if it doesn't have a huge impact on the game, it decreases your enjoyment of it. The sniper may have been having a great time, but you weren't. And since it's a multiplayer game, everybody's got to have fun. So I thought about that, and I've applied it to miniature games, and there's a few interesting examples here. And the reason why it works for miniature games is fundamentally we are playing a multiplayer game. It's just not on a computer. There are multiple people involved. We all want to have fun. That's the point of what we're doing. So when mechanics come up that tear the fun down, I get a little annoyed. So let's talk about what these might look like, where they can come from, and go through a few examples. So, like I mentioned, we want to create fun, and these mechanics can generally be viewed as reducing fun. Now, what fun means to you is somewhat flexible. Some people have fun taking models off the table, pushing models around. Some people like the deep strategic experience. And what I found is that both in-game strategies and core mechanics, or even just model mechanics, can cause these things. Oftentimes, if it's a strategy or a mechanic, you'll hear it referred to as a negative play experience, or an NPE, if you ever see that phrase floating around miniature games. And the premise is that there's no meaningful choices, or it denies so many options to you, the player. So a good example, well, we'll go to the examples in a moment, but we can generally see a reduction or removal of a given play style or strategy. If I have an ability that says that effectively says if you play a melee army, you auto lose, how is that enhancing the fun of the person on the receiving end of the mechanic? I just said your entire army strategy no longer works. Could you imagine that in a game? One of the examples we have in a moment is literally that, where a model had an ability that would functionally say, if you're playing a melee army, you auto lose. Maybe it's even a strategy. Maybe you want to castle up in gunline or something like that, or whatever, and I have a bunch of abilities that say, well, if you do that, you will auto lose. How is this enhancing the experience for the player on the other end? Now, I do want to mention with all these real fast, obviously this is your mileage may vary. You may not care, and that's totally okay. If you're fine with it, it's entirely up to you. That being said, a lot of this stuff, you may still recognize it as unfun. And in fact, if you don't care, that's the kind of things you got to look at, where if you look at things saying, oh, I didn't have fun, and I really don't care, but I come out of a game kind of upset, that might be an indication that maybe that game's got some core problems. So we've got reduction or removal of strategies. That's an option that we could see this with. How about apocalyptic effects? For example, if you didn't prepare for it. Again, we'll have an example in a moment, but what if it was a case of you need to bring or do something very specific, and if you don't, you will auto lose. This is a little bit different from the playstyle because the playstyle one was just a blanket statement of what you can't do. This is saying you must do something the other way around because if you don't, you will auto lose. Well, what if that person, maybe it's a new player and they don't know? Can you imagine that? New player comes in, tries something. I didn't know I had to do that. Loses the game on the spot. Is that fun? Is that engaging? From the perspective of available strategies, is mandating your opponent must do one specific thing a good thing? No. Just as taking away options is bad, forcing specific options on somebody else is also bad. You're not increasing the available strategies and options to the player to allow them to enjoy the game. And then the last common thing that I've seen with a negative play experience is randomness. And this can tie into some of the other effects, but sometimes there are random effects that make no sense. And usually they're tied into apocalyptic effects or something like that, or even just little things that can create situations where players get frustrated. Okay, and particularly I'm going to pick on this if there's no way to influence the dice roll. So let's talk about some of those examples. And before I get into these examples, I know I can hear it right now. Somebody's going to say, oh, well, in this game, it's okay. They balanced it around that. Number one, I'm going to contend that if you have to balance your game around a mechanic, it's probably a bad mechanic. And second off, even if it's not necessarily broken or unbalanced, who cares? If it's not fun to play with, the fact that it's balanced means nothing. The fact that it's balanced actually, to me, argues the other way. They're embracing a mechanic that really shouldn't be there. So let's talk some examples here. Let's start with War Machine, rather favorite game of mine. And I'm going to pick on one character, it's two versions of the same character, from their second edition. And that was Captain Victoria Haley, also known as Haley 1, or Major Victoria Haley, also known as Haley 2. Those of you who play War Machine may know exactly where I'm going with this. Captain Victoria Haley had a spell that she could cast called Temporal Barrier, I believe was it what it was. And it basically said any unit caught within 16 inches of her. It wasn't really 16 inches, it was just the way that things worked out. It was always 16 inches pretty much. Could not run and could not charge. Now, War Machine charging gives you extra distance and all extra damage. For melee armies, charging is a critical component. They need to be able to charge. Having a 18-inch diameter or 18-inch radius circle, I'm sorry, it's a radius. This thing took up a huge chunk of the table where you could not charge, rendered some factions unplayable against this particular character. If you were playing the Scorn or the Crix factions, you were screwed. There was almost nothing you could do aside from hope the Haley player made a mistake, and that wasn't something to rely on. That's a pretty easy thing to do. Your entire core strategy doesn't work. Could you imagine pulling up to a game, looking down the table and saying, none of my stuff works? Are you going to have a good game? Are you going to have fun with that game? I don't know about you, but I don't know if I would. And to add insult to injury, her second version, you could play either one in game, had a once per game ability that caught everything within 18 inches of her. I'm sorry, it was 16 for Haley 1, it was 18 for Haley 2. She got to pick the order in which your models moved during the turn. And keep in mind, this is War Machine. There is no movement phase and attacking phase. It was your guy moved and attacked, and your guy moved and attacked, and you just work your way across your entire army. She dictated what you could do, what order you did things in, and said you had to pick either move or attack. You couldn't do both. Talk about reduction of strategies. You don't get a strategy that turn. You get to do nothing, or functionally nothing. Again, from a design standpoint, what sane human would have looked at and said, yeah, it's okay. We like this in our game. Now, some people are going to like those effects. Some people aren't going to care. I understand that. But you can, hopefully you can at least look at that and say, yeah, I could see where being on the receiving end is not entertaining. If you're there to have fun at a casual night and this happens, good lord, it's insane. Let's pick on another one here. Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition. Yeah, we're going to go back there. Had a mission called the Watchtower, and basically the premise was you set the table up, you put a watchtower in the middle, and whoever won the roll-off could put a core unit of, I don't think there was a size limit, into the watchtower. And the way that the game worked was you had to, whoever controlled the watchtower at the end won the game. Okay, cool. What's the problem? It was nearly impossible, because Warhammer Fantasy Battles encouraged big units, and the way that attacking buildings worked, it was nearly impossible to clear the building out. I never saw somebody lose this. I take it back. I think I saw once somebody lose the scenario where they started with the watchtower. I probably saw 300 games of it. You needed very specific tools to do it, and even then, you only had 6 turns to do it, and your opponent could just cycle what units in the tower. That was easy. I played this scenario with my Warriors of Chaos army, and I'll just drop a Marauder unit in there. Happily. This was also back when Khorne Marauders with great weapons were 5 points a model. You killed half of them. I'll pull them out and stick another one in there. You'll never take the tower. You have to take the tower, but you can't do it. You're just flailing away. There's nothing you can do. Are we having fun yet? Let's go to a more recent version of Warhammer. Age of Sigmar has a double turn mechanic. And every time I bring this up, people say, oh, well, it's balanced, and if you prepare for it, it'll be okay. Sure. If you don't prepare for the double turn in Age of Sigmar, you will lose. End of statement. Yes, obviously there's a degree of skill of your opponent, but if your opponent is really trying and you don't prepare for them to get a double turn and they do, the game is almost certainly over. Combined with the fact that 40 AOS has very little in the way of comeback mechanics, are we really going to argue that this is a good mechanic for the game? Oh, by the way, keep in mind, it's totally random. You can't influence the roll. Are we having fun? The whole system's built around it. I understand the argument it's balanced. Does that mean it should exist? A common hyperbole that I point out for some of these, and this is an example of the randomness situation combined with the apocalyptic effect, but it's a hypothetical scenario. Pick your favorite miniature game. Doesn't matter what it is. Now imagine they come out with a new unit, and the effect of this new unit is at the start of every turn, you roll a d6. On a 6, you auto-win the game. There is somewhere out there a point level or something that balances that. Would any sane human argue that such a mechanic should exist? Does it add to the enjoyment? Does it add to the number of available strategies to both players? Does it enhance their gameplay experience? I would contend no. And I put Age of Sigmar in the same boat here. Yeah, it's balanced. But it's balanced in a way that if you don't prepare for it and it happens, you're screwed. And it's totally random. Aside from the fact that there's a tiebreak rule. Can't affect it, can't control it. In fact, the way that the mechanic's set up, it may never happen. It may never happen. So why is it there? A sense of excitement for the game? Is it excitement or dread? Ask yourself that. Are you excited at the roll, or are you dreading the roll? Is it a mixture of both? Because when I play a game, I don't want to dread single dice rolls and be so emotionally invested in it. If it's that big of a deal, is it too big of a deal? Now for AOS, let's go to another topic. Not list fortressing, but the fortressing controversy in X-Wing a few years ago, back in 2.0. Those of you who are not familiar with X-Wing, you have to set up a maneuver for your ships. You do it all in advance, and you move your ship, and if your ship can't complete the maneuver, it doesn't move all the way. There was a way to set up 4 ships in a way where they never moved. 4 ships in a square in the right orientations never moved. This was comboed by the fact that if you actually picked a fight with them, they would break formation and they outgunned you. That straight up charge to them, they won. But that was the only available option you had because of the situation. This created a huge kerfuffle in the X-Wing community. It was referred to as a negative play experience. Your opponent isn't going to do anything. Are you having fun? Play a game against just static models that never do anything. Are you having fun? Imagine playing a game where your opponent castles in on a hill. And they're never going to move. They're never going to come get you. But if you attack them, you lose. Are we having fun? Maybe you want to have fun and charge the hill and see what happens. Okay, that's fine. But hopefully you can see why that's not something a lot of people would enjoy. I mean, this is insanity. Every single one of these mechanics, no one would enjoy being on the receiving end of. Another good one, spam. For those of you who are not familiar, spam in a miniature context simply refers to taking something a whole lot of times. I have a good, decently optimal entity here. I'll just take 7 of them. There's no depth to the game then. There's no decisions. There's no target priority. I just have a good thing, and I have lots of good things. I'm not playing a strategy. I'm just playing an efficiency game. What happens on the table isn't that important. Again, let's go back to our argument here. Is this reducing the number of available strategies? Yeah. And hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about here, that when we talk about games and we pick on games here, a lot of it comes down to, does the game have good mechanics? And we're not talking in terms of clarity or ease of play a lot of times. We're talking in terms of this. Does this mechanic reduce or remove the number of valid strategies available to either player? Does it have a potentially, or in some cases, a potentially game-ending effect unless you prepare for it? So the previous one is you lose options. This one mandates a specific option. You have to do this one thing or this one group of things, because if you don't, you auto lose. Randomness. I didn't give a good randomness example. Allow me to help with that. I would contend that the charge distance in 40K right now is an example of a bad mechanic. Yes, you can control what you need, but ultimately it is entirely random. There's no sense of control over it. Potentially gaming, and I'm going to specifically pick on this in 6th and 7th edition when there was no option for a reroll, no abilities that affect it. It's gotten more tolerable now, but back in 7th edition 40K or in 6th edition 40K, you had your roll 2d6 for your charge distance, and that was it. If you rolled a 3, there's no rerolls. There's no modifiers. Your giant melee death blob just failed to charge an opponent that in universe is about 8 feet away from them. Are we having fun yet? Now somebody say, oh, well, that's the drama of battle. Sure. I'll agree with you. But can you also understand that things like that reduce what's available to players? It's an apocalyptic random effect. I've seen games won and lost on that. Now, of course, dice are an aspect of the game. You're not going to truly get away from them. But do you have to tie potentially game-ending or critical effects to dice rolls you have no control over? You can have a perfect strategy, and one dice roll fails you. I understand it's the presence of the dice roll, but do you need that dice roll that you can have no influence or effect over? You can't affect what it goes off on. Is that okay? Or should we try and make a game where those don't exist as much, where we are using the randomness, but instead of the randomness winning and losing games for you in and of itself, it's more of a how easily things work. And we'll talk about that in a follow-up video where we'll highlight some examples of what I consider to be good mechanics, where you'll see that their presence or removal increases the number of options. They're not causing apocalyptic effects that require very specific counters. They're not just throwing randomness in there for the sake of randomness and tying the game to, well, who can roll dice better? You can't control the dice. And I've met a number of people who it's like, you played a game and your best solution to how to do better is to roll better. Are we having fun? That's my question for you. So guys, it's been a little bit of a shorter video. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. I will catch you guys on the next one.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.